All right. Good evening and welcome to the Community Center Exploration Committee meeting. It is Monday, January 8th, 2024, and it is 7:02 p.m. 6 out of our 7 voting members are present, plus a few ex officio, and I do expect our 7th here shortly. First order of business is it's been a long time since we've seen each other. So we need to approve our meeting minutes from October 25th, 2023, which I know Nikki did circulate to everyone. I didn't know if everyone had a chance to look at them and approve them. Any comments? Okay, seeing none, I will move that we approve the meeting minutes from October 25th, 2023 as presented.
Second.
Any further discussion? Roll call vote. Jen?
Yes.
Susan?
Sorry. Yes. Yep.
Nikki?
Got it.
Yes.
Tim?
I will abstain.
Okay. Janet?
Yes.
And I am a yes as well. So 501 vote on those. Next is a chair and member update. Neary Building Committee. Obviously, the work of that committee is very much tied to where this ends up going, I think, as a community. Assuming no surprises tomorrow night, a contract will be approved with a firm called Arrow Street as been selected by the MSBA subcommittee, which is, made up of more than just Southborough residents. It's basically for mainly architects and designers from the MSBA themselves at the state level. So Arrow Street was selected as part of that competitive process, subject to contract negotiations. So the Neary Building Committee is meeting tomorrow night to ratify that, which would then make it official, which would then kick off just over a year of design work on the building, which will involve a lot of things, including grade configurations, the appropriate site selection on that site, showing that there are no other sites in town, and a whole slew of other things. The tentative schedule is that project will go to a special town meeting in and around April of 2025. So it would not be part of an annual, and the goal is to get it in before the May ballot of that year, assuming successful town meeting votes. That schedule could shift forward or backwards depending upon, obviously, how that process unfolds. But that project is now, in my opinion, fully going to kick off starting next week. Any questions on Neary? Then I'll come to you, Pam.
Yep.
I did have a question, Jason, if that's okay.
Go ahead. Yeah.
No. So is it part of the process for MSBA that you have to have it in a special town meeting? Because if the time frame gets moved up and like you're ready to go with annual, would you do that? Or does it have to be structured as a whole separate meeting?
It doesn't have to be, but the logistics, it will likely be one of the most attended, if not the most attended town meetings, based on whatever number that ends up being will be the largest project the town has approved for anything. It'll make public safety look very, very small. So it's more tactical and planning wise, there's no reason you couldn't do it within the annual. It just candidly would create a scheduling nightmare for anyone else that has an article in that town meeting, because you don't know, the debate could be 30 minutes or it could be multiple nights, depending upon and you should know the tone of the community well before you go in there, obviously. So no, it's not a special requirement.
Yeah, I'm partially asking because I think, I've been educating myself about how the process would work with the library, with the state grant cycle too, and I think we would have to ask in the fall at the year that the construction money would get approved. So that most likely will have to be a special town meeting unless we're planning to have another special town meeting anyway. So I was curious if MSBA had a similar process because I'm not as familiar. So, but thank you. That answers my question.
It'll come down to the timing, Brian. We have 60 days from when MSBA approves our plans to get funding. So it's more of a ticking clock. It ultimately comes down to whoever the 5 members of the select board are at the time. They're the only ones that can call a town meeting. I can tell you, leading up to the public safety complex, there was no debate about whether that should be its own article, own town meeting. Now, of course, 7 citizen petitions got attached on to the end of that meeting that never actually got heard. They got pushed to the next town meeting. But my personal view is it should be in a special, but there is no requirement. Pam, go ahead, then I'll go to Tim.
Bill is trying to get on. He's having problems. I'm not sure why. I told him to take a shot and try to get on through the town website.
Okay.
So hopefully, he's working on it. I'm not sure if there's anything is there anything you can do on your end to?
He might have clicked the 1-2 link that I clicked at first too, because I got 2 links. One of them was a dead link and one of them was for this meeting. So he might have accidentally clicked a dead link. If you guys got the same thing I got, which was a rescheduled Zoom call. So tell him to make sure he's checking the right one.
Okay. And I'll send him I'll resend him that link that I got.
Yeah, I went in through the town website. It was easy.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
I'll keep an eye out on both sides, but I can't do anything other than resend the link.
No problem. Okay.
All right, go ahead, Tim.
My only question was, with the process where it is, I haven't really been following everything. Is there any chance that the 40B projects or anything would affect anything that we're doing with where the NERI process is? Or is that all being considered and included in that process at this point in time?
I have found Bill. So that's good. So we're good on that. On Tim, it's a factor. There's a contingency in the numbers that they're using for enrollment, but obviously, as the process continues, if something new comes up beyond that contingency, it would be factored in. But given I know there's a few things that have been floated and some that are with the permitting boards, and then others that are more kind of, hypothetical at this point. We would consider anything that's close to permitting at this point.
Okay, just making sure that the capacity wouldn't affect any decisions that we would have as a purpose vote or anything.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. All right, welcome, Bill. We just did the minutes and I gave a quick update on NERI, so you've not missed anything directly related to this committee yet other than the minutes. All right, the next is to go on to review and accept the DRA report. I realize it's long, but what I thought I would do is frame the discussion and make sure we're in agreement on general parameters. Then after I frame it, I'd like each of the representatives that represent a distinct board or committee just to outline exactly where their committee is at and what they've discussed, and then talk through the actual report and see if there's any questions or comments before we authorize the release of the word draft. But I guess I'd start by saying, in reminding everyone that this is a proof of concept. This is not design, right? This is not saying that Council on Aging would go in exactly this spot and exactly this would happen. This is more could Finn work for the main needs this committee was trying to undertake. The actual design, whether it be high intensity, medium intensity, low intensity, exactly what rooms someone would take, I think, candidly, in my opinion, unless someone disagrees, we don't need to discuss that right now. That would be a whole other phase, far more detailed, far more ability for user feedback beyond this. I think the question we're really trying to answer is Finn viable for what, especially the 3 user groups here we're looking for, either in silo or in conjunction with each other. And then really say, is this a good framework for some group, whether it be us or others in the future, to work with as like kind of a launching pad for future decisions. Because our charge expires at the end of the month unless we request the select board to advance it. The goal is that if we're ready, that we would go in front of them with our presentation next week at their meeting. That's their goal. Again, I need to make sure we're ready, and I don't feel it's imperative that we do it next week versus another month from now if we're not ready. But I think at the same time, this process has obviously been longer than anyone signed up for, mainly because of the starts and stops, especially with the consultant. So does everyone agree with that framework or have any disagreement with kind of what's in play, what's out of play at this point? Okay. Jen, I'm going to come to you first. Just can you just brief update any conversations Rec has had as a broader group, any feedback that we should be considering as part of the conversation or ultimate conclusions?
Yeah, so I don't think it's anything necessarily particularly different or new. And I went back and read through the updates that the consultants did in their thing. And I think in general it's fine and it's there. I think that maybe in your deck that we'll get to later is where we capture some of these key bullet points. But I think that for Rec losing that ball field, that we can't net out with one less ball field in town. So if there's some crazy way that it ends up over at Neary or somewhere else, then that would be fine. But we can't lose a ball field in this, even if it's temporary while the library is there. We still can't lose a ball field. We think if we pick this back up again, I think one thing we need to look more closely at is storage and storage capacity there, knowing that Rec has South Union stuff to the gills and stuff everywhere else around town. And I think we need to truly understand how much storage we really need to make sure that that we're accounting for that in the final design, however that's done. What was it? Yeah, so the one thing I noticed in the plan from the consultants is that Rec had asked them about that playground, or big sections of it are going to reach its end of its useful life in a handful of years. So there was a question of, instead of losing a ball field, is there some way we use part of that space from the playground and reconfigure that into parking? And it looks like that feedback didn't get into the final plan. But when we go back to this, we want to make sure that we're looking at parking and storage, and making sure that we can explore more options there.
You probably saw I put a little placeholder on the parking side of need to consider recreation if they're going to lose a field or a playground.
Yeah, I saw that. Yep.
And I would hope if the timing should work well, that recreation should have an understanding of exactly what will be at Neary, both from a playground perspective and a field perspective. More importantly, the field, because you're always going to want that playground on the south side.
Yeah.
And obviously it then helps you with whatever decisions end up going forward with South Union as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like that's the only other thing that's come into the mix is that potential to lose both playgrounds on south side. So yes, we want to keep an eye on that.
I cannot see that. I mean, if it's community center, I don't know how there's not a playground. It's just a question of how big of a playground it is and whether you redo the playground as part of a community center project. Just my opinion.
Yep.
Okay. Anything else from Rec?
No.
Any questions for Rec? All right, Janet, let's go to you next on library.
We can't go into the details of the plan with any specificity because our things are so up in the air. But I do appreciate the fact that they're trying to juggle our needs that maybe, a temporary lodging for the library for a couple of years, certainly ongoing storage, regardless of what else happens. I appreciate that makes things complicated, but that's just what we're facing. We did get capital committee approval for the design money, but that has to go before town meeting. So we are still pursuing the state grant addition to current library route, but yet that could fall through. So we appreciate you're keeping all of our needs, given the different scenarios, in play. And I do want to, we do need to keep the idea of some space in the building for storage or whatever, just so that when we do get to design, we don't want to over design an addition that ends up so expensive that doesn't get approved by the town. We'd like to be able to use space as efficiently as we can. So that's yet another factor. But otherwise, there's nothing in here that gets in the way of any of those options.
And Ryan, keep me honest, we would know about whether we're moving to the next phase of MBLC within calendar year 24, correct?
Oh, definitely. It should be by, my understanding is by the end of the summer, and we may get an indication if it's sooner, because by May I'll have an idea of how many people got approval at their town meetings on the design money. So I think what's going to happen is a fair amount of the 35 that did the letters of intent, some of those will not either be ready to ask town meeting for the planning or design, and some will ask and it won't pass. So that kind of increases our chances, which is a mean way to say that, but that it means if they're only going to take about 10 libraries, we'll have a better idea of both of our chances. And then we're going to have the application pretty much ready to go, I think, by May. I mean, that's when it has to go in. So, I think that answers your question. But it should be, I think by August is the latest we'd know. End of August, Jason.
Okay. Go ahead, Tim.
Ryan, can you just refresh my memory on what the grant covers again?
So it's planning and design. So it's basically to hire an operating project manager. It's then to go out to bid on an architect firm. And then we will be doing subsequent investigations. There's going to be, we can hire a water specialist finally. We've never actually done that, to look at in-depth assessment on flooding. We're going to do like some environmental testing. We did some of that in the building with the CPA money, but it had to be specific to the historical society. So we didn't do like anything on like outside soil. And then hopefully we will have preliminary designs on what the new library would look like by the end of that process.
So the second part of that would be, is it like I forget the nuances. Was it a match or was it a grant for what we could spend from that program?
Yeah, so I'm double checking on all of that, but the way it used to be that we would ask the town for some of the money and the state would kick in some of the money. But my understanding is now it's going to be that we requisition the 150 from the town, and then the state doesn't start matching funds until we go for construction funding. But I have to double check on that one.
Okay, I guess my question was the construction part of it. I forget what you told me before, and what you told us before was, do they do like a 50-50 match or something like that for up to a certain amount? I just forget that part of it.
Yeah, so there's not a set formula on that for really the way that they're kind of restructuring, because this is all new, the way that they're doing the cycle now. It used to be 2 separate grants you would apply for. So Jason has heard this so many times, but there was a planning and design grant cycle, and then there was a separate construction grant cycle. Now, even though there's multiple steps, it's all integrated into the same thing. The idea was to not sometimes the planning and design those would be 7 or 8 years apart. The idea behind doing this in a more sort of combined process is that you're not dealing with ballooning construction costs. So it's to move the process right away. They're really trying to prioritize some of the smaller Western Mass libraries. So a goal of the revised program is the smaller the edition, this is odd, the more money the state will give you. So it used to be that they would only give up to 47% for any project. And now, depending on how much square footage you're adding, that calculation can be higher. But it really, you don't know until the end of the design process. But I will say that this kind of does help us give a blueprint on not designing like a monolithic library, but on getting the space that we need. And if we do, I don't want to say it's like going to be lean, but I don't think we're looking to like triple the size of the library, right? So the more sort of structured edition we do, the potential for it being a higher reimbursement comes into play.
Thanks.
Go ahead, Susan.
One thing I wasn't sure I saw, I know we're talking about that kind of temporary versus permanent location for the library. Does this, or have you gotten any feedback about whether or not it might be kind of that secondary branch, or I'm not going to say the children's library branch, or that it's some sort of annex, or is it really kind of the whole library or storage for the library? Is there a middle ground for the library in any of these designs?
Well, so the capital committee, and Jason's on capital too, so I'm going to say the capital committee, but Jason's aware of this. They've really charged the library trustees with having a discussion about whether or not we would proceed with a redesign outside of the construction funding. And I will say, we waited, 10 years since I got here to sort of move forward with the redesign process, which we're only doing this year because the construction money is available. So I think you can already kind of going where my recommendation is going to be on this, because it's going to be so adversely expensive to look at doing this without the incentivized grant process from the state. But I would say there is a potential that we would not get the grant. I might try like one more time. And then I think at the end of the day, and the trustees have said this already, is the library is going to need more space. So I think at that point, we're going to have to be kind of inventive about what we do. And Jason needs a plan for what's going to happen within now. I mean, that's the whole idea on looking at this. But I would say if we are unsuccessful in our efforts with the MBLC, that hopefully we can have a dialogue about what options might be, depending on how much rec and the senior center are utilizing that space. My answer is always a non-answer whenever I am asked this question, but I hope that makes sense as far as where we're at. We just will, I don't think we like the idea of moving the entire children's room. I think that was pretty clear as a result of all of this. But as far as relocating some potential services that make sense, I think if we can expand our current blueprint, we would look at what the options are.
So for the scope of this committee, you would say that we're still keeping the library as a potentially major piece of the community center, just for the purposes of today's vote and what our committee is being charged with. It is still important to take into account.
I think looking at what DRA came up with as far as the proposals, and I think Jason's I know Jason, your slides were still in progress, but I think Jason's summation on the slides that are going to be given at the select board presentation, I would say all of that is, I think Jason did a good job at representing where the library is in this process. And I think DRA in the report did a good job as well. There is the high renovation concept, which is at the end, which still talks about an entire library in that facility. So I think that that's still represented if we went that route. It doesn't seem like that's going to be what happens, but I can't predict the future. And sorry, we should have let Janet talk before me.
I
That's
did.
the important
Well, she
note.
did. She did, in fairness.
I'm sorry.
I started this by directing the grant question to you. And then I think a few others piled on. So Janet, go ahead, then I'll add something.
It's just, this is stepping back from the details for a minute. I'm just worried about where these two projects are going to hit in terms of town meetings. So can we walk through that timing again?
You mean Neary Community Center or Neary Community Center Library?
I was thinking near, I guess all three, if you can.
Yeah, so I think I was gonna say before I called on you, I think Ryan's synopsis about the yes, maybe, no, right answer, I think was perfect for this exact, like, this is why I think we as a committee have gone as far as we can, right, with the data we have, but why this next year is gonna be really important, right? To make Ryan's yes, no, maybe into a yes or a no, right? I think there's a little more definitive answers from the recreation side, and we're still going to get the COA, but I think that's a little more definitive than where library's at. And obviously, we don't know the scope of Neary, but Neary is about the most defined in terms of timing, right? That's going to go to town meeting in April of 25, and I don't think you're going to see students in a building until fall of 28. Which, if you think about that, fall of 28. Assuming it's a larger school and Finn is now back on the table, that's the earliest that you could have any construction going on at Finn. Does that make sense? So now I think there is a strategic thing, and you can kind of see anyone that had a chance to peek at the slides that we're going to talk through in greater detail. I think there is a strategic decision that doesn't need to be answered tonight or this month, but soon, is if you were to go to town meeting and Finn was part of that process to be decommissioned as a school, then I think you at least owe the taxpayers an idea of what it's going to cost to retrofit it and what you're going to do with it, right? Because that may bring support from certain user groups that you don't have support on for the school, as an example. Now, you could also bundle them together, which is dangerous, right? Because you may have people that are really in favor of the school and not in favor of the community center, or vice versa. Right. So again, I think as you do public vetting on both projects, as you move forward, it'll become clear what the answer is. I don't know what that is because no one's reacted to this other than really the people on the screen. And candidly, Neary Building Committee has no idea how many grades we're allowed to build yet, because the state's going to have to weigh in on that too. Now, the library, I think we at least have in the FY29 capital plan, Ryan, for construction. I assume, depending on the outcome of your grant, that could be sooner or later, depending on where we're at in priority order.
Yeah, it might be sooner, is my understanding, but only by maybe a year or two.
Okay. So, Janet,
Did that misalign what you just said about the 28 timing as a temporary location if it's earlier? Did I just get the dates mixed up, or did I follow that process, that logic?
It's going to be close, I think. I don't think we know. The only thing that's definitive is the Neary timeline at this point. Like, that's pretty locked, regardless of whether you're 2 grades, 3 grades, or 4 grades there. It's going to be roughly the same timing. It's just a matter of how much you're building there and what cost. So the timing may or may not line up for temporary infrastructure, I think.
Okay.
It's also, and not to further add confusion to the timeline, but there is also a possibility that if we were to go to a town meeting and ask for construction money and it failed, there's a certain amount of like leniency the state gives us on qualifying for the funds, where we can go to like 1 or 2 future town meetings and ask again. So I realize that's somewhat the definition of insanity, is to ask the same question over and over again and expect a different response. But in many cases, libraries have been able to educate their communities better and to respond to questions that come up in a town meeting. And then they've made the case for it and they've convinced their towns to do it. It failed a number of times in Shrewsbury, as an example, and then I think passed. And I think the 3rd or 4th time they asked, and that it made a big difference, I would say, in how they structured those conversations with their community. So I don't want to, Jason has a lot to accomplish, and I could talk about the library all night, which we all know, but I just wanted to mention that it might be, we can plan till we're blue in the face, but the other thing is it may fail, and that might not be the last word on the topic too. Because sometimes, you barely have 100 people at a town meeting. We saw this with the Main Street project, where there was lots of discussions at different town meetings, so.
So when would be the earliest we would be going to town meeting with a library construction request?
That's a Ryan question.
Yeah, so in the earliest would be 3 years, but it also depends on how much money the state gets granted for construction funding year to year. So it's honestly a state budget question as well, Janet. And I would say that with Governor Healy and the current status of the legislature, it's been very kind to construction the past couple years, and it looks like it's going to be a good couple years in the next few years. But
Isn't there an
Like-
earlier?
April 27.
it would be the fall. I think we have to approve funding, so it might be the fall of 27.
Okay. It
Yeah.
started sounding when we were talking like it was gonna be bang, bang, bang. And I'm
Yeah.
sure
Well,
townspeople will probably feel like it's bang, bang, bang when we're asking for these kind of monies,
But it's more likely the fall of 28, just to further
Okay.
this. The
But-
earliest it could happen is 27.
okay.
assuming you have 3 projects, Janet, I
Yeah.
think it's safe to say you need to present, the town should be aware, much like I think both you and Nikki were on advisory when public safety came forward. Whoever was running the modeling, right? You were assuming multiple other projects were coming behind it and said we can still afford public safety at the time.
Right.
Right? So I think that's the same rigor that, assuming you're all successful with the MBLC grant process and all of that, like I think we need to assume that we're gonna have 3 construction projects in around the same time until one gets eliminated, right? And then just a reminder to folks that aren't familiar with this, any of this stuff is likely going to require a ballot vote as well. This isn't just town meeting. So it's 2/3 at town meeting, 50% at a ballot. So you have to line it up, hopefully with an election or something as well, to exempt the debt. So again, not to deviate too much on this, but there's a whole process, and I think there's at least 2 question marks, i.e. community center and library at this point in terms of timing, but I think we can safely say it's all in and around the same time frame.
But it's not the same year, or it's not back-to-back years.
Correct. Although, again, I come back to my strategic question, should community center and Neary always be tied together, or should they be separated? Again, it's a question. I don't think we need to answer it tonight, but it's just something that people need to be thinking about.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tim. You had your hand up.
Yeah, Ryan, one quick question or thing. You said 150,000 for a study that was going to be reimbursed through the grant process, right? That would come soon on like the next town meeting, right? That's
Yeah,
not
so
28.
Yeah, so it's not a reimbursement, Tim. I'm trying to think of the exact terminology. We have to procure, it's the wrong word, but we have to have the town, we have to ask the town for $150,000 for planning and design as the next step. So the 2 big things that happen, well, really 3, because Jason brought up the third too, that all happen this year, is in March, we have to ask for the 150,000 from as a warrant article. So that goes in as a separate warrant article. And we're vetting all of that as part of the town budget process now, but the capital improvement and planning committee has voted to support it, and the trustees have voted to support it. So we're going for all the other boards now. Then in May, we actually apply to the state construction program. So there'll be an application form, and there's a lot of this timeline and everything is being developed, and it's going to be up on the library's website in the next couple weeks. So everyone here will be able to review this, because if I'm misspeaking and everything, we're going to double check everything when it goes up. So May, we apply. Then the third thing that's really big that happens this year is by hopefully the end of August, we find out if we were accepted as one of the 10 libraries in the construction grant round. And then that's when that's when we're off to the races. Because we have to
So-
eventually go to a town meeting to ask for construction money.
So just wanted to throw it out there. This conversation will start at the next town meeting this calendar year, where some conversation will start to ensue around all of these pieces that are going to be floating. Now, I know it's going to be focused obviously on the library, but from the three things that are going to be fighting against each other, it's all going to start at the same time, and they all work together in certain kind of ways. I just wanted to point that out as a group.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to move on from library in a second, but to close it out, I think the town has already talked about MIRI and appropriated feasibility money. Now, a year later, the library is coming and asking for feasibility money. At some point, and I personally would not vote for this until we know Finn's on the table, a community center building committee would have to come for design money. Again, design money is a lot different than construction money. We're talking usually 6 figures, not 7 figures or 8 figures. There are any other items on library feedback before we go to council on aging?
Sorry
Right.
for all the time, Jason.
No,
Sorry.
I think it's important to connect the dots to hopefully make the rest of the discussion easier as we get to the back end of the meeting. So Bill, go ahead.
Okay, Council on Aging looked at the plans and were pretty positive about the whether the school was an adequate or feasible option. And for many reasons, we felt it was. The fact that it's on one level, and the fact that there's space for senior center activities, adequate space. The courtyard was kind of a plus. The availability of the function hall with the stage, the availability of a commercial kitchen so we could do lunches like most other senior centers are doing these days, and the availability of a gym. So there were a lot of pluses. Our concerns were adequate parking, same as rec, and the fact that we don't want it to look like a school made over into a senior center. We would definitely opt for the high intensity renovation, although I looked at the one that DRA has done and I didn't see that it was high intensity, but they may be able to explain that away. So we voted yes, we would consider it at this point. I don't know what else you might want to know at this point.
Cam, anything to add?
One other thing that I'd like to mention, we keep talking about taking that back area and letting the town offices use it. And yet all three groups are saying, hey, we need more storage. Don't forget, we need more storage. There it is. Forget the town offices. Let's have that as the storage for rec, if in fact they're on board with us. Let us use some of that for storage for the outside furniture and things like that we have for the senior center that needs to go someplace in the off season. So this building has storage space if we don't give it back to the town offices. A side comment.
Good, Pam.
They were very adamant that it was more on that high intensity option. They're very adamant that it doesn't, turn into something where you end up moving in, retrofitting into the school. Basically, they're very concerned about that, as well as the parking. Those were the two big key things that could go sideways. If those were not to occur, then they really want to reserve the right to kind of revote on those things. So I just want to make that real clear.
I mean, to me, that's certainly clear and expected. And I would think that's where a composition of a building committee in the future becomes very important, right? And the stakeholders that are at the table there, obviously it wouldn't be just COA representation, but maybe there's two COA representatives, right? With 2 votes on that. That can mean usually a building committee somewhere between 5 and 9, depending on the other stakeholder groups. I mean, that's one way just for all of you to think about accomplishing it in the future. Any questions for the COA? All right. Based on the feedback from all 3 groups, does anyone think we need to propose any edits in the DRA report? Again, this is to the DRA report, to just have them take the draft off and accept it as final. So would everyone be comfortable if I made a motion to accept the DRA report?
Yes.
Okay, I will move that the committee accept the draft DRA report as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, seconded by Jen. Any further discussion? All right, roll call vote. Jen?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
Nikki?
Yes.
Janet?
Yes.
Bill?
Yes.
Tim?
No.
And I am I. That is a 6-1 vote. Tim, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
Well, I wanted to just caveat, I didn't spend enough time completely reading through everything in the detail I would feel comfortable to accept it as with a yes vote tonight. Second to that, I did miss the last meeting, so I did a lot of catch up. So I was kind of not able to speak at the last meeting because my son had a food allergy and I had to deal with that. But I just wanted to spend more time with this to feel comfortable for myself, to be fully on board with some of the flex changes that were discussed at the last meeting, as well as some of the other things that I didn't have personal input into.
So how long would it take you to get up to speed? Because I think having unanimous votes pretty important, but obviously respect the fact that you haven't had the time to spend with it.
I mean, I've gone through most of it. It is 50 pages long though. So I just didn't get a good chance to read all the wordings for every level. I mean, I need another day or two for myself to feel more comfortable.
All right, so let's do this. Let's keep going with the presentation and talk about the presentation and what we want to do there, and then decide whether we have another quick meeting to vote again or to see where the presentation's at. But I think, I guess, my first question for the committee is, do you feel like you're ready to kind of wrap up our work and make a presentation to the select board?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. How do we want to go through? I put basically a framework in, but I have no idea what people were thinking in terms of, I knew that the general feedback from the various user groups, but you know, conclusions and stuff like that, I took a stab at based on where we were trending at the end of last meeting. But do we want to go slide by slide, or do people want to just offer comments or direct me along the way here? Or do we want to delegate someone to work on this? I mean, I'm wide open, but I don't want to steer the committee one way or another of how we want to do this.
Why don't you make a suggestion and we'll tell you if we have problems with it.
So I also wonder, I mean, if we're going to regroup again anyways to do like one more final vote, do we, so I was reading through it and like, I agree. I think you're capturing kind of general sentiment. I think that, especially knowing this is going to be a project we put down and pick back up later, thinking that it probably would be good for each, make sure that we have like a document, like this was Rex, like key questions and considerations that are still need to be landed, or these were senior center, like let's document like a page for each of them, even if we put it in the appendix, to make sure that this becomes like the final living document for whoever picks this back up. Who knows if we're going to be those people again, or if it's someone else we can pass it on to. And then I think like we just pull out some of like I don't know, maybe the key elements from this report to kind of be like, hey, like here's an example of what it would look like. Here's an example of this. And then your appendix has documented like key open questions or concerns.
I like it. Any other feedback on that? So let me make a suggestion. I think recreation, library, and COA, we have one ex officio and one voting member for each of those groups. I think each should go off and make their own slide. You can literally just send me the bullet points. That wouldn't be deliberation. But if you just send the bullet points and I'll add them as is, don't worry about formatting, anything like that. That's easy to do. But we already have a placeholder slide for each of the groups. And we've actually already discussed, I think, what would be in those bullet points during this meeting. Is that amenable to rec, COA, and library?
Do you need something additional from us than the letter that we gave you with outlining what we liked and?
I could probably pull some bullet points out. I think your bullet point is need parking and want a high level intensity design.
Yeah, and then
Yep.
do all the pros efforts.
I will do your bullets for you and make sure you and Pam are comfortable with them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's, yeah, it's all in the letter.
Just a
Yeah.
copy of the
It's
letter.
all there. I'll pull it out for you. That's fine.
Okay.
And everyone agree
Jason-
with Ken's suggestion that should be an appendix, and then I'll come to you, Susan. Sorry. Okay, go ahead, Susan.
I was just going to say, I have for the notes for the meeting today, I've tried to capture for each of the different groups what their concerns and questions were. So also I can send that to you, not that I'm part of any of the affinity groups, but hopefully I captured at least the bulk of each affinity group's concerns and questions.
That'd be perfect. Okay. So then on the renderings, I do like the idea of having pictures, both of the building and the parking. But honestly, I didn't know, and I don't think you want to put up like 5 of them, like, because we're not like picking option 1 versus option 2 at this point.
No.
But I wanted to respect in particular our library colleagues. In fairness, I liked the visuals that didn't have a ton of library space, not because we don't want you to be part of this, but just it seems like the most realistic. Like you having, like, I like the ones that showed your storage space, but not like you occupying 22,000 square feet. But I also am happy to put in big bold, library can fit in here. It would just come at the sacrifice of, candidly, other user groups.
That's fair.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Now, Jen, I'm going to look at you on the parking.
Yeah.
Because I think most of the parking scenarios are kind of like with and without Fin 2 and or playground.
Yeah.
You said you were somewhat comfortable, like that they kind of ignored your suggestion about the playground, but weren't completely comfortable about it. You
Well,
know,
I guess my thought is like, I don't want to kick this entire report back to them because they
Yeah.
didn't look at that section. They probably have to, honestly, they'd have to go back out to the site probably and look at it. And like, I could tell you which part is going to expire, we need to
Yeah.
replace, but like, they're not going to. So that's why I think we just capture it in like the appendix, like, hey, when we look at the parking lot, this idea was on the table. There's a question about like, you know, when this playground's replaced, do we replace the same footprint or not? That should be on the table. And then just kind of documenting that we can't lose a field in town. So if it can be displaced or put somewhere else, then that solves that problem. And then that parking would be fine. But just that yeah, we already fill them, and removing one is not really an option because then it will negatively impact the kids that are playing sports. Yeah.
Okay, that answers the parking question, which was slide 6. Then slide 7, this is like the ticking, the difficult question I think we have here is, DRA did provide a spreadsheet, right? And I think that spreadsheet would become part of our work that can be passed along to a future committee. But if you start throwing huge ranges out there, it just becomes kind of meaningless. But I think it's important for people to understand at least the bare bones, like what it's going to cost. And then obviously, I think we all know and respect the COA's opinion about high intensity for at least a certain portion of the building. In rec, I think probably it's going to be to be determined. Gym space obviously doesn't need a lot of work, but the classroom, like how do you retrofit that into spaces that may be needed for you is, I think, a question mark, right? So does anyone have any view on what we do from a costing perspective here in terms of not only some of the options they've thrown out, but also do we show kind of the cost of a new building if that were to be in play for any one of these three options?
I think we should show the cost of the new buildings, but it almost seems like we need this spreadsheet to be adapted to have sort of high intensity for the senior center, but medium intensity if the library is not going to be our main focus, because doesn't option 1C include the library entrance and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
So it would be a little bit misleading to have like the whole new library be part of the high intensity renovation when for the most part we're talking about the high intensity for the senior center. And I don't know about what the rec decided on high intensity versus the medium or low.
Well, I think
So-
the high intensity for 1C includes the space that could be the library, whether or not the library actually goes in there or not. So I'm not sure necessarily. I understand what you're saying, but I don't know that. I think high intensity is mostly for the senior center, regardless of whether the library's in there or if it's rec stuff that goes in there for the top part.
But it includes the new entrances and the whole restructuring of that part of the building for the library, which we are saying we probably won't need.
Yeah.
Because
Well,
Ryan.
Nikki brings up a good point too, because part of the rationale, if you remember when DRA proposed the entrance, was that there would have been parking that was added on that side, which essentially is now being removed because of the recreation concerns about the fields. So, I mean, like maybe this is shooting ourselves in the foot a little bit, because I think depending on where the ultimate usage of the building is going to be is going to be a factor in the cost, right? Because we could move some books in there, and I know there was a concern also from DRA that like the flooring needed to be like weighted correctly in order to put books down, but like Nikki's bringing up that like we probably won't move books there. That's not the current plan, right? So I don't know. I don't think the entryways are gonna look the same, because I think entryways need to be based around parking. That's my contribution, only because that's been a big, like, as we've been doing the library survey and we've been talking to people, that like parking and entryways has been a big part of that discussion so far. So it matters to people. They want to be able to park and enter a building. That's what I've learned. And we were talking about like 3 separate entrances to the building at one point. Like, I know it's a big building, but does there need to be that many entrances?
So to answer Nikki's point, it's not a question, it was a point. I think it is proper to ask DRA, and it may be option 1D, high intensity renovation for the senior center, and just give us what the cost is, assuming that there's not going to be a full library there, right? And they know the square footage that the senior center would occupy. So I think it's all formulaic. I just don't want to do the math for them and make a mistake, right? But that seems to be where we're all trending, and then assume something for recreation, but obviously not the entire footprint, especially with the gym being in play.
Yeah, and I think recreations would be pretty minimal. I can't imagine it's actually that, like, maybe one floor or like one of those fitness rooms, maybe one flooring changes, but that's like a shared space, and yeah, it shouldn't be that much to change it over.
All right.
Yeah, and I'm sorry,
So-
Nikki, before I didn't realize with the entrance and the exit, the entrance and the parking, but I mean, just looking at this option 1C, if we take out the demolition new construction, which is 2 million, and is that essentially what that extra
No, I mean it's
entrance?
that's renovating 43,000 square feet. That's twice the size of the senior center.
Right, but that's in there already. The high intensity renovation
Yeah.
piece is in there.
Yeah, but then you've got like code upgrades and stuff like that too. So what I want them to do is assume high intensity only for the senior centers. I think what Nikki is saying.
Right.
It seems consistent with the conversation here in the request from COA, and just see what that number. Have them tell us what the number is, right? Okay. Susan, did you have another point, or was that your point?
I did. My one
Okay.
other point was I think simplifying down the whole design pricing to square foot to price per square foot and project cost. I mean, personally, that's all I looked at. I don't know if other people disagree, but I don't necessarily needed to see the breakdown, well, except for this conversation right now, the breakdown of how much per low intensity, per site allowance, per the subtotal building, the code upgrade allowance. Like, I'm really looking at, for this meeting for right now, is the square footage amount and the total project cost.
I wasn't going to screenshot this whole spreadsheet. Someone wants it. It's a public record, but I hear you. Tim, go ahead.
I was going to say my opinion is to make sure from a taxpayer standpoint, because I am thinking a lot about all these projects going together as this document's out there living. Having the other options that are very high as standalone buildings and whatnot is something important to see. And for comparison's sake, when you look at the other numbers, kind of helps understand kind of where things are landing. I was going to say if there was a way to do low, medium, and high per area, I was kind of thinking about that. So like if the library had a low, medium, and high, you could always go, well, we're going to do like just a temp thing and we're going to be in that low section. And then, it's kind of easy to kind of pick and choose a la carte, but it may or may not be the best way to kind of put this together. But I was thinking about that as I was considering how this could be easier to digest. Because you could say, okay, well, if the senior center needs to go to the higher level, then low, medium, high there. So you're sitting at that number, and then you add this other number up, which is low, and you add this other number up, which is low. And then code upgrades is the only thing that makes that complicated, because you do need to consider that into this. And I know one of the things that I'm not personally supportive of is 1C with the demolition piece. So I don't know where the rest of everybody feels about that demolition piece, because it seemed like people were lukewarm from what I was reading reactions. I don't know if we want to include that or not.
I don't think 1C is a viable option based on where the library's at. Period. Right.
So then if that's not, then maybe we find a way, or we just omit that as part of one of these options, and 1C gets replaced and 1D takes its position, or some other way of presenting this information.
Yeah, I like to replace or omit and add 1D. I mean, I'm hearing a lot of consensus about general direction tonight from all user groups. And we've heard Rex say they need low intensity. We've heard COA say they need high. And we've heard library say, we want something, we just can't tell you what yet. Right? But we know it's not going to be a whole library. Like that seems like a very unlikely scenario unless something happened to the existing structure. So I don't want to.
I wouldn't want it to be nothing for the library, because even if it's used temporarily, whatever, I think some work needs to be done. I mean, I just look at all those big columns and how much room that takes up from library stacks and stuff. I mean,
yeah, that's fair.
So maybe the a la carte, maybe the a la carte idea for like library low, medium, high, another one low, high, or whatever we would need. Maybe that's the easiest way to go, because you can kind of say expected would be this with this scenario. and then we just leave it at that.
Okay. Let me see if DRA can pull that together for us. Any other items on cost? All right.
Jason, do you think you should, I'm sorry, do you think you should put the cost of a new build in there just to give people perspective?
I
Or is
think,
that-
yeah, I think someone said that early on. Yeah, it's gonna have
Okay.
new library, right? Assuming a brand new library, 20,000+ square feet, new recreation center, new senior center, and then it'll have kind of our preferred option for Finn, which would
Okay.
be replacement 1C or new 1D. Sounds like, and then obviously access to the data to do exactly what Tim was talking about.
Okay.
Tim, did you do something else?
Is 2027 still a date that we want, or is it 2028 based upon the discussions we just had?
I'll make sure they look at the MSBA timeline again and make sure that they're comfortable with that, because you bid a year before usually. So even though you may not be doing actual construction until 2028, you would actually be getting the bids in 2027. I'll just make sure. That's a fair point.
Okay.
Are we ready to go to the conclusion side? Any wordsmithing, comments, things to add on this?
I thought it was great, Jason.
Yeah. I did too. You did a
Okay.
good job.
I liked it.
All right. That was way too easy. What about next steps?
Wait, so did we just decide that we're putting a cost for new buildings?
What we're gonna do is we'll obviously gonna have another meeting to look at it. But my intent, if I was to do it on the fly here, which I'm not going to attempt to do, is say library is X number of square feet. The cost of new construction is Y per square foot. Here's the total cost using just those two numbers, right? The same cost per square foot would then be used for COA and for recreation, just to illustrate if every group were to go on their own, which no one is suggesting they do, this is what the project would be. You know, by the way, where are you going to find the land to do this? But that's all it's going to show, Ryan. Just as like obviously all three user groups can't do their own thing, and also have a new school in town or renovated school.
Yeah, I mean this has been the hardest part of the process for me, is that everybody keeps asking me how much everything is going to cost. And I mean, part of why you go out to bid and part of why you do design work is to determine what those costs are. So I just, if it's okay, Jason, if I can go on my little tirade for 30 seconds, it's just, I think it needs to be clear that this is a cost estimate based on square footage, because like what I'm learning is designing like a local history room with its own climate control is going to be a different cost within that square footage estimate versus if you were just adding the square footage. So, and I think that's using a library example, but there's going to be different, especially it sounds like with the senior center, there would be different determinations that would have to be made as a result of the space. So just as long as we're clear that it's an estimate, I think is important.
I will bold
Okay.
everything. People need to understand that, right? There have already been numbers floated around NERI for 3 or 4 years at this point, and they're big numbers. But until all we can work with is facts, and that's what you're saying. Average cost per square foot, right? Because just look at public safety as an example. The cost to build a dispatch center or a jail cell with monitoring is a lot different than building a garage for a fire truck, right? So it's an average cost per square foot, right? Like of each room that I think DRA has good enough facts that they're working with other communities to give us the average. But as we all know, those averages have skyrocketed in the last couple of years.
Well, and that's the other note too. I mean, like a good thing I can say too is Tim is really holding us to the price point, right? Like he brings it up, and I think it's important because it's what people care about. And I've been finding that as part of the conversations on the library side. But we're also basing this on today's date. And the frustrating point is that like construction costs fluctuate in a way that is very frustrating. So just want that on the meeting recording, I guess. Okay.
You can take any editorial rights when you see the revised of if estimate is not clear enough. I'll make a special, tell me your favorite color, I'll make the font in that color, you know? Okay, next steps in the process. Any questions on that? Comments, I should say.
So, just to reiterate, to the group, we're gonna go in front of the select board with our recommendation PowerPoint, and then essentially our work's done at that point. This goes on ice until it gets revisited again in the future. And that's kind of the next steps that we're gonna have.
Yeah, I mean, we've taken it as far as we can without data from the library and data on what's happening with NERI, right? If the state comes back to the NERI building committee and as part of that process, it's only going to be a 2-grade school, then unfortunately, each user group's back to the drawing board of how they accommodate their needs, right? If Finn becomes a viable option to be decommissioned, then the appropriate step at that point, again, you're going to know this in the next calendar year, is the select board should set up a building committee that either continues work with DRA or goes out and hires a separate designer and probably an OPM to do like the detailed design work to get you a real cost, not this, I'll call it 10,000-foot approach that we're at. Our process was to explore this, not bring it to, we're not bringing an article to town meeting, but they do need to also think about design funds, right? If you're going to form a building committee, you want to time that around when a town meeting is, so that that committee actually has someone to do the work. They're not going to be able to design it on their own, even if you put all registered architects on the committee, which is not what's going to happen.
Wouldn't DRA have to rebid, Jason, if they?
Not the way this was done.
Okay.
This was done under designer selection guidelines, so they have the ability to continue. That's why we didn't have to go out to bid, as long as we were comfortable with them, because this was for anything related to town office space needs other than public safety or schools. Now, if this was just a library project, yes, Ryan, they would have to go out, but because it's a community center, that is within the confines of that.
I just meant if you end up hiring an OPM and then a building committee is formed, and then wouldn't there be like a separate designer selection process? Oh, okay.
You can do yeah, it's weird. I get it somewhat backwards. But that's exactly how public safety worked. There was a designer on board for over a year before the town hired an OPM. Usually you hire an OPM first, but they didn't need a project manager at that point, given the pace it was working. It was mostly a political decision, as most of you know, in terms of the land swap. You're following the right process from a library perspective, though. OPM, then designer. That answer your question, Tim?
I think so.
Okay.
So Jason, when you say we go in front of the select board, do you need the whole committee to come? Are you just going to do this?
I always welcome anyone that wants to speak. I'm happy to do as much or as little as the committee wants me to do. That was the next date they offered me. I told them we weren't ready for January 2nd for obvious reasons. But if we don't feel like we're ready after tonight, I think I can obviously go out to their next meeting. They obviously have plenty to be talking about with the budget and other things at this point. So again, my first priority is that the whole committee is comfortable, and I'm happy to present. I'm happy to have others come. They obviously do all their meetings hybrid, so you can go live, you can go on Zoom, and I would post regardless of what people tell me, just so in case we had a quorum of 4 or more voting, that we're covered.
I think it would be good to have representation from at least all like the 3 like name groups, because they will probably have questions and it'll be good to have someone there to speak to it. So
I agree. So can you make Tuesday night?
This group has to meet again, though. Wasn't that what we all decided? Yeah.
So maybe let's figure out if Tuesday works, and we can work backwards. So like, does everyone feel like we're at like close to the goal line, but not in the end zone?
Yes.
How fast can DRA do the couple of things we just talked about with those pieces to put in the presentation and then still have time to talk about it?
They're on standby. They knew we were meeting tonight, so I expect, given that we didn't change anything in the report and that it's formulaic, I would assume it's a pretty quick turn.
And kill 1C, replace with 1D, and we all have time to take a look at that ahead of time and make sure we like what it says and then put that into a presentation. I'm just throwing out the practicality of that within arguably a week.
I don't think we're editing their report, Tim. We're just editing what we would share out, is like what we pick out. Because I think we should like leave everything in the report. This is just like an option, even if we don't think it's viable. So the report should.
But the report we just said that we just said a couple of minutes ago that 1C was not something that anybody was really leaning towards. So we were talking about omitting that and putting 1D in its place.
Well,
I thought you meant omitting to go to the select board, right? So like, yeah. I don't think like, because I mean, someone else is going to have to pick this up later. I think we need to keep all the information we got in the report as long as it's like accurate, even if we don't think we'll ever do it. But what we pick out and bring to select board, like we don't need to show them an option that we don't think is even viable.
Yeah, I think, Tim, my intent with where everyone seems to be landing is the report stays as is. DRA has told us many times, both through this process and the process they did for capital 2 years ago, even if we threw up on an idea, like in terms of the concept of it, it's important to show that it was considered and know that it was just eliminated based on deliberation of obviously the voting members. I would just advocate for purposes of costing, that's the reason we're doing 1D. I don't think that ends up in a report anywhere because there's really not much on the costing in the report. Like all the options are there in terms of the potential footprints. But I think what we're just trying to show is through our deliberations and analysis of options 1A, B, and C, we basically want to up the intensity on one scenario and down on another. And I would say this report that we're looking at tonight is essentially the same report we got back at the October 25th, whatever meeting minutes we just voted on at the beginning of the meeting. There's very little that they have changed since that meeting. So my preference would just be to run the costing scenario for where we're trending, but not revise any written documentation around it. And just obviously use Bill's memo and other things he mentioned to support particularly the high intensity that we're recommending for senior center.
But that option also covers the libraries unknown with low, medium, high, correct?
Yeah, but unless something dramatically changes, I think Ryan and Janet are on record is the most likely uses of that facility are going to be ancillary to their operations. It's going to be storage or temporary. It's not currently anticipated as an annex or a permanent library. Of course, that could change, but that would be well caveated that that's not a low intensity renovation.
We never go with a high intensity renovation. I mean, at this point, I don't anticipate that would ever be on the table. So I don't know about he's talking about a low and medium option. I don't know if we'd ever get to medium. I mean, I think it's pretty low for our purposes now if we're just talking about storage or temporary space.
If I can jump in, I think low would be the temporary space, medium would be an annex or a thing of that nature, and high would be the library moves there permanently with the current location in play or not in play due to the deed restriction. That's the way that I've been considering the low, medium, high in my brain. It's not exactly written down that way, but that's just the way I've been, when I see these intensity levels, that's how I've been kind of thinking about it. I don't know if I'm wrong with my thinking, but that's kind of how it's been landed.
Yeah, that's fair.
I think that's fair. Yeah. I would say probably not. I don't think it's worth doing a high intensity for the library. I don't see us moving there as a permanent new space.
But being there for a year or more during construction is more than just low intensity. So it's.
No, it's still kind of low intensity because it just means
Yeah.
they're not taking out all the windows, that they're not knocking down pillars.
You're not going
and-
to take down walls, Janet.
Right.
You're gonna unfortunately have to adapt to where the walls are as a temporary space. But you got to remember, you already have a library there, right? I realize that won't fit whatever Ryan
Right.
wants to accomplish in that year. And
Yeah.
it's hypothetical, like whether you even have to move. I realize Ryan's sick of banging and all of that based on all the recent construction, but depending on what you're actually doing, that's still even a what if.
So is
Yeah,
it
I
fair to
think-
say, so option 1A is low intensity across the board, 1B is medium intensity across the board, 1C is high intensity across the board, and then 1D is kind of that cherry picking that we were saying, where we want to do a low intensity library and a medium intensity rec and a high intensity senior center. Is that basically, so 1D
I
is an
heard
amalgam.
low for rec. Jen, keep me honest.
It's low for rec also. Sorry, that one I made up, but yeah, the others. Okay.
Yeah, that's
Realistic.
what we're saying. We're mixing, we're calling it the proposed commingling of each of those scenarios.
Yeah, a realistic approach as we see it today, based upon everything that we see in front of us that we know about. Because obviously there's a lot of things we don't know about.
Oh yeah, a lot. All right. So Tim, assuming they can turn something around by Wednesday, again, it would be a spreadsheet. It wouldn't be any edits to the report. I
The
think our
report's
question.
not going to say that.
The-
Isn't that where it
No,
is right
because
now in the report?
their job is to provide us data. Our job is to provide a recommendation. So that's, I think, what our slides need to say, not necessarily their report. Like, unless I'm
Okay, 'cause
on the report, they don't tell us what we should do. They're giving us options for consideration.
So right now the report has correlation between the spreadsheet of money with what you get. So I would at least like to see 1D outlined as senior center X, and then the rest of it's still 1A. So it should just be some copy pasting into a thing just to support that spreadsheet as one final thing. That's what I see to be complete here.
Okay, I'll broach the topic with them. I can't imagine that's going to be.
And I mean that's only us reviewing two or three pages, like not a lot, but it's not the whole thing again. So I think that would be realistic.
Okay, so assuming they could do a quick turn on that, and we still want to so Jen, can you meet with select board on Tuesday night?
Like next Tuesday?
Yes, or do I need to ask them for another date? Because then that determines when we meet in between.
Yeah, like next week I've got on site all week and we have events every night next week. Next week's really bad for me.
Okay, so and I think it's important for you to be, even if Tim Davis could be there, I think it's important for you to be there.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to even pull Janet and Bill then. Let me get additional dates from the select board then, and just say we think it's important. They will, if they argue with that, then I don't see that being an issue. So then once I know our date, I think we should set another date though to meet. Just to approve the report. That way it's ready to go and that we're ready to meet with the select board, because there's a chance they call a special meeting, right, to dispose of this and deal with it in an hour or two, however long it's going to take, and whatever other miscellaneous topics they add on. So obviously next Monday is a holiday, but I assume no one wants to meet again this week, just in case the timing slips from DRA.
If we don't
I
have to
could
try to
do later.
chase Tuesday,
I can do it.
This week?
I can do Wednesday, but not Thursday or Friday.
Sorry, I had a few people talking over each other, and I just want to make sure we're talking about the same dates. So, Nikki, what week are you talking about? This week or next week?
This week, I can do Wednesday, but not the 11th or 12th.
Okay, we cannot post again until the 11th. Because of time, I've lost my window for Wednesday because I'm within 48 hours. So it'd have to be Thursday or Friday. And I realize Friday's not ideal unless we do it during the day, which people are working for the most part. So I imagine that's just out.
I could also do like a Friday morning if that would work for folks.
Friday won't work, morning won't work for me, or Friday night.
Okay. All right. So let's go to next week. Tuesday through Thursday. Any preferences?
Wednesday or Thursday for me.
I'm out all next week. Sorry.
What about the 22nd? So 2 weeks from tonight.
If we do before 7, I've got rec at 7 next Monday, the 22nd. But I could do like 6 or 6:30. I'm assuming it wouldn't take long for us to meet. Or rec, I can keep them on track. Like I could do it 8 o'clock here and make rec fast.
What does everyone else think?
I can do either of those.
Probably prefer the 6 if people can do 6.
I can do 6.
Any objections to 6 and the 22nd? So I will tell the select board we can meet. You good, Bill?
I was gonna say, if we're gonna meet at 6, okay, I need to be out of there by 7:15, out of the meeting.
It sounds like Jen has to be done by 7, so you guys are on the same page.
Okay,
What I would ask is once DRA gets us the stuff, if there is something that someone needs, it is entirely acceptable to reach back out to me individually, not the whole committee, and say, I need this from DRA to be comfortable. And I can put you in touch with them to see if that's something they can provide, just with the goal of wrapping up our work. So once they get us the revised documentation, if there's anything that's just completely missing that you need to be comfortable with what we're going to present, just make me aware of that so that I can get you in touch with them. All right. So 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. or earlier on the 22nd of January. And then I will keep everyone posted on the select board date, but we'll specifically poll Jen, Bill, and Janet to make sure that they can join unless they choose to delegate to their ex officios.
okay.
Okay. Anything else on that in terms of the presentation or wrapping up our work? Okay. Is there any public comment? Is there any other business that anyone wants to conduct tonight? All right. I'll make a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All right. Roll call vote. Jen,
Yes.
Susan,
Yes.
Nikki,
Yes.
Janet,
Yes.
Bill,
Yep,
Tim,
Yep.
and I am I as well. So that's unanimous. Have a good evening, everyone, and see you on the 22nd.
Yeah.
Thank you.
you.
Bye-bye.